So I ran into this post on Reddit recently on metacurrencies, which I thought was really interesting, generated some controversy, and I thought I would give my take on it. The title of the video is "Not Liking Metacurrencies Because They Aren't Immersive is Kind of Stupid." And that is a common take on it. I guess it would be my take on it, is that metacurrencies break immersion. They stop you from feeling like you're in the world. So what does this guy say? He says, "I've seen this take in a few places. People tend not to like games with metacurrencies such as Fate, Cortex, and 7th Sea. While I understand the sentiment, money rations, etc. are real things, but hero points are too abstract. I really think this way of thinking is ridiculous, and I'd like to hear other people's opinions on it." So he has 3 main points here. Basically, every TTRPG has metacurrencies. This, I think, is just flat out false. It's going to depend, of course, on how you define metacurrencies. But when I talk about a metacurrency, and when I think most people talk about it, what they mean is they mean points or something that you can spend, a resource that is outside of the game, that the players are aware of and can use, but which the characters are not aware of and which they cannot use. And if you would define it that way, which is I think the way that most people would define it, then every TTRPG does not have metacurrencies. He says metacurrencies are basically anything that a character has a limited amount of that they spend that isn't a physical thing. Yeah, I don't think that's a good enough definition. But every TTRPG I've played has metacurrencies like that. Spell slots in D&D. So spell slots in D&D, I wouldn't count that as a type of metacurrency because the character is aware of them. If you are a D&D wizard, then you know how many spell slots you have, in the sense of you know how many spells you can memorize per day. That's a real part of the setting itself. So it's not outside of the game fiction. Movement per turn, definitely not. Again, that's a bit of an abstraction, but it's modeling something real in the game world. Players or characters would know how far they can move in a certain amount of time. That's just your speed. Same thing with things like actions per turn. That's just like how much stuff you can do, right? That's a measurement of how agile you are, basically. XP, that is a bit more abstract, but it's not a currency because you don't really spend it, at least in most games. Luck, again, a lot of games don't have luck. His second point is that metacurrencies feed the heroic narrative. I think when people mean metacurrencies, they're referring to those that influence roles or the world around the player in a meaningful way. That's what plot points, fate points, and hero points do. But these are all meant to feed into the idea that your characters are the heroes. Now, yeah, I think that's generally true. In games that have that type of metacurrency, the reason why you have those things is to give your players, a type of plot armor. And I think he agrees with that here. They have plot armor. In films, there are many situations that any normal person wouldn't survive, such as dodging a flurry of bullets or being hit by a moving car. All of this is taken as normal in the world of the film, but this is the same thing as what you, as the player, are going to be are doing by using a plot point. So what separates you from the goons? If it's not type of your game, then it's not like you don't like metacurrencies. It's that you don't want to play a character where you're the hero. I actually disagree with this as well. While it's true that metacurrencies like this can create a hero-like narrative where you're protected from things around you because the world shifts in your favor when things go badly. Really, being a hero is a person who does heroic things, right? And that doesn't have to do with plot armor necessarily at all. There's an argument to be made, one that I would make, that in old school style games, you often feel more like a hero when you do heroic things because you don't have that kind of plot armor. You're actually taking a greater risk to yourself. The world isn't going to shift and luck isn't going to suddenly turn in your favor when things go badly for you. If you make a bad mistake, well, then you just died and your risk didn't pay off. But you took that risk. You really did risk your life, and that makes you more heroic. His third point is that the term metacurrency is a bad term and that just adding meta to it is what makes people not like it all that much. And I don't think that's particularly true. He does have a little bit of an edit further on where he talks about I've read through some of the comments, getting kind of heated. Here's my conclusion. There's 3 levels of abstraction with currencies in play. You got physical currency, money, arrows, rations, and so on. Character currency, spell slots, XP, stuff that are not tangible but that the player can do. And player currency, things the player can do to help their character. So metacurrencies fall into camp 3 and therefore technically can be considered one extra level of abstract and therefore less immersive. Now, this is sort of true, but my take on it is that really this third level, player currency, is not part of the same spectrum of abstraction that levels 1 and 2 are. Really, it's a kind of different thing entirely, because 1 and 2 are inside the game world, 3 is outside the game world, and that is the fundamental distinction. What it comes down to when you're designing your game is whether you want the player to be thinking in-world or thinking out of the world, or a blend of both. When I designed Knave, which you can see back there behind me, it doesn't have any of these metacurrencies that players can use, because my goal, and this is the way that I like to play, is to have my mind fixed on what's happening inside the game world, pretending that I'm in there and making choices from within this world. If I want to affect what happens inside the game world, I want to affect it from inside, not from outside. I don't want to feel like a writer or like a god manipulating the world behind the scenes. What this really reminded me of is the discussion of stances, which is a very old term in RPG theory going back way back. I think it's discussed over on the Forge, but it's even earlier than that, which is the different positions that a player can take relative to their character. So here's how stance was discussed over on the Forge, and I think it's a pretty fair characterization of what's going on here. So you have actor stance. In actor stance, the person determines a character's decisions and actions using only knowledge and perceptions that that character would have. So this is if you really like to play in character. Whatever your character's motivations are, those are your motivations. What does your character know? That's what you know. So the second stance here is author stance, in which a person determines a character's decisions and actions based on the real person's priorities, then retroactively motivates the character to perform them. So for example, this could be if you're exploring a dungeon, you might think, well, my character probably wants to press on further, but I really want to actually go back and explore that side room because I think it looked cool and I think we missed something back there and I want to get more loot, even though my character maybe isn't as motivated to do that. And then you might say to your friends, oh, my character really wants to go back and explore that room because, well, we saw some interesting markings back there and, my character has always been interested in scholarly things, so maybe they want to investigate that. Right? I think I'm thinking primarily about what I want, but then I kind of, factor in what my character would want afterwards to excuse why I'm doing that. That would be author stance. And then there's another stance here called pawn stance, where you even ignore that part, right? I want to go back and explore that room because I think it would be cool. And, that's perfectly fine. All of these stances work well with each other. Players shift between them all the time. And in pawn stance, it's really more like it's you, the character, not you, the character, you, the player, are in the game world. So it's like you are just there and the PC is like an avatar of you, the person, rather than a person that you're playing. Now, I bring all these up because the third stance here, director stance, is really a lot like the metacurrency stage that was brought up in that Reddit post, where the third level of abstraction, the person called it, was the third level of abstraction was metacurrencies. It's like that here, but with director stance. Because in this one, in director stance, a person determines the aspects of the environment relative to the character in some fashion, entirely separately from the character's knowledge or ability to influence events, right? Spending metacurrency. Therefore, the player has not only determined the character's actions, but the context, timing, and spatial circumstances of those actions, or even features of the world separate from the characters. What's interesting here is that these first couple stances, actor stance, author stance, pawn stance, are all similar to each other. They are on a continuum, whereas director stance really doesn't feel like a stance at all, because it's not so much about your relationship to the character, but it's about your level of authority within the game world or at the table that you're playing in your campaign. The first three stances are stances that players can and do fluidly move in between without anyone noticing a lot of the time. But if a player at your table suddenly decided to start influencing what the game world was like, you'd be like, whoa, hold on a second. You're not the game master. That's not how this works. Unless, of course, your game had particular rules for that sort of thing, like metacurrencies. Ultimately, I think the reason why a lot of people, like myself, aren't big fans of metacurrency is not because it's too abstracted or something like that. It's because we don't like the shift in narrative authority that happens when you use metacurrencies. There are particular pleasures that come along with being a game master versus being a player. And usually when I pick one of those things, I want to be the game master today, I want to be a player, it's because I want the experience that goes along with those things. If I'm a player, for example, I like the experience of exploring and finding things that I didn't know were there. I like the experience of being set in a fixed framework, a fixed world, and then being given tools and figuring out what to do with them. And if you add in metacurrencies to let me alter the world, put me in director stance and give me a little bit of GM authority, then it removes the pleasure of doing those things as a player. It's not a lot of fun to explore and find a location that I created. It's not a lot of fun to solve a problem when I can just spend a token and the problem is solved. Now, one more blog post I think has a lot of interesting things to say about this topic is this one, Dissociated Mechanics, a Brief Primer by the Alexandrian. So in this one, he talks about two different types of mechanics, associated ones and dissociated ones. His definition is an associated mechanic is one that has a connection to the game world, and a dissociated mechanic is one that is disconnected from the game world. The easiest way to perceive the difference is to look at the player's decision-making process when using the mechanic. If the player's decision can be directly equated to a decision made by the character, then it's associated. If not, then it's dissociated. The example he gives here is if you had a football game where you had a one-handed catch ability, where once per game you can make an amazing one-handed catch, granting them a +4 bonus to that catch attempt. Here I think he's kind of referring to 4E, which was more popular when he was writing this, where you would have like these once-a-day mechanics, these once-a-day abilities that you can use. Some were spells, some were things that just marshals could do. They weren't necessarily magical. You could just do them once per day or once per encounter. The mechanic is dissociated because the decision made by the player cannot be equated to a decision made by the character. No player, after making an amazing one-handed catch, thinks to themselves, wow, I won't be able to do that again until the next game. Nor do they think to themselves, I better not try to catch this ball one-handed, because if I do, I won't be able to make any more one-handed catches today. On the other hand, when a player decides to cast a fireball spell, that decision is directly equated to the character's decision to cast a fireball. The character, like the player, knows that they have only a single prepared fireball spell, right? That once-a-day thing is baked into the setting and into the mechanics of the world itself, something that the character would know. So the decision to expend that limited resource and the consequences of doing so are understood by both character and player. Now, he has a lot more interesting commentary on this, and I'll link to it down below if you want to read it yourself. But really the core of it is that he says, all this is important because role-playing games are ultimately defined by mechanics which are associated with the game world. Role-playing games are self-evidently about playing a role. Playing a role is making choices as if you were the character. Therefore, in order for a game to be a role-playing game, and not just a game where you happen to play a role, like you could say that, Monopoly or StarCraft or all sorts of other games, you play a role in them, but we wouldn't call them role-playing games, usually. The mechanics of the game have to be about making and resolving choices as if you were the character. If the mechanics of the game require you to make choices which aren't associated with the character, then it's not about role-playing. And that would mean that in the moments when you are using dissociated mechanics, then by definition, you are not role-playing because you're not acting in the shoes of that character. So all of this is not to say that associated or dissociated mechanics are inherently good or bad, just that they offer fundamentally different experiences when playing the game. The more that you want to actually play a character and be in that character's shoes, or at least feel like you're in the world, the more you want the mechanics to be associated with the game world. And the more you want to have narrative authority, where you have this view from outside the world, where you have more control over what the world looks like and how the story goes, the more you're going to want to have dissociated mechanics. In my view, this is the fundamental distinction between the OSR at one end of the spectrum and story games at the other. It's about where you see yourself standing in relation to the game world, either deep inside it or outside of it. And speaking for myself, when games try and do both of those things at the same time, there's a lot of clash and I stop getting a lot of fun from either of them. So what's your take on all of this? Are there some role-playing games that you think do metacurrencies really well, where you can have authority and feel like you're immersed in the world at the same time? How do you feel like that works? What are some great examples of it? And remember to check out Knave 2nd edition, which is now available in print or PDF form at a bunch of different places around the internet. I will put links down below. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.